So with that, I'm actually going to call this meeting to order. We have a quorum of the board, and so this is a formal board meeting. We do not expect to take any actual action, but the opportunity is, for some of you, we had our first information session back in March. This is taking a look at the northeastern quadrant of the village, to look at both a planning document that's sort of the vision for the area, and then also to have that subsequently fall into zoning amendment for the village zoning code. And we've had a variety of meetings and discussions, and there are some further amendments that we are planning from the law that you have. We just didn't get those into a document in time, but we can talk about those. But without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Bonnie Franson, who is our planning consultant from Nelson Pope and Voorhees, and we are both thrilled to be working with you and thrilled to have you here. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure for me. So for those of you who have not met me, I'm Bonnie Franson. I'm with Nelson Pope and Voorhees. We are a planning consulting firm, and we have been working with the village for some time. Really, the first even draft of the land use study was put together around April of 2024. So this has been a very deliberate process in terms of understanding the area that we're addressing. So essentially, we were brought on board to evaluate the North Broadway corridor, the land use studies, the zoning, existing conditions, and then to present that in a report. And part of that corridor study area includes the Cookingham property, which, as you all know, has been the subject of review. There's a desire for a developer to acquire it and to consider land uses for that property. So as part of the overall study, we have to consider that particular property when we're considering land use and zoning changes. So this process has essentially been in two phases, the first one being a land use study, the second one ultimately being the zoning. And for the study area, and you'll see it on the study that is on the website, and there's a copy here, but we looked at various data, including demographics and housing, land use, the existing zoning, building patterns, traffic and mobility, such as sidewalks, utility and utility availability, environmental conditions, such as slopes, or water bodies, wetlands, and then ultimately that land use study, after considering all of that, came up with some observations regarding planning for the area and some goals and objectives. You'll see that this particular map here, this is one of the figures from the study, but it's probably a key visual because it's showing you what the existing zoning is at this time, and then the general land use pattern. The study area is really a larger area that extends, again, around North Broadway. It does encompass some other properties, again, for context. So this is essentially the second phase of this process, where we take those goals, those objectives, recommendations, and then ultimately develop suggested zoning amendments to the village's zoning to ultimately achieve the objectives of the land use study. And so it's important to know that the plan, this study, goes in hand with the zoning, because the plan essentially is, it would be adopted as an addendum to your comprehensive plan, and it's the vision for how you want this area to evolve. The zoning itself is the regulatory framework that people have to meet to be able to develop within this area or redevelop, because obviously the area is already developed. So really the purpose of this particular workshop is to go over the preliminary draft zoning. So there are some 11 by 17 graphic here on the table as far as what is the new suggested zoning district, and it's outlined here. You can see it. It's proposed to be called the Gateway North area. And so, in evaluating this area, we see North Broadway as sort of a transitional area. It's transitional from the downtown out toward the town of Red Hook and the agricultural area. So you're sort of on this continuum from, you know, a core downtown area that's more developed, more dense, and then going outward. It also has aspects of being slightly more conventional commercial at this time. Unlike, you know, your tight little downtown with the historic buildings and that traditional building pattern, it gets a little looser as you go up North Broadway. But certainly there's always been an intent to ultimately redevelop, adaptively reuse buildings in a way that start to get toward that traditional neighborhood pattern that is part of the zoning and part of the pattern book. In developing the zoning, we're also sensitive to the fact that there are existing residences on the west side of the proposed zoning. So this is really only encompassing the east side of the North Broadway corridor, essentially in and around Cherry Street. It takes in a couple properties below to the south of Cherry Street and then extends up to upwards to include the Cookingham property. So the proposed zoning would incorporate the existing uses that you see there today. So there's no intent to zone out anybody that's there already. And the proposed zoning would also then create this aspirational framework where you're allowing more uses that are more consistent with this concept of a traditional neighborhood pattern, including allowing mixed uses, including allowing residential uses. So beyond apartments, townhouses, some other types of residential development. It does differentiate from what is the general business zone, which is how it's mostly zoned at this time, because again, it would allow a larger variety of residential uses. And it's also somewhat similar to the existing neighborhood mixed-use zone, without absent being part of a larger planned development, single and two-family dwellings. So this also creates a framework for development of two relatively large properties that are currently vacant. Again, one being the Cookingham property, the other being the Ross property, which are encompassed within this Gateway North zone. So there is a desire to keep non-residential uses along the frontage, again, in a more traditional building pattern. Residential uses would be allowed on that frontage if it's upper story residential uses, but otherwise, what's recommended for residential uses for those smaller lots along North Broadway would be that multifamily would be allowed, or townhouses, or apartments would be allowed to infill, but to the rear of the properties. The pattern book, the plans for the village always considered the creation of a parallel road that would go behind CVS, essentially, kind of up through those properties. In fact, there's already sort of a multifamily project that's over there, development. And this would create sort of a spine, a parallel road, and the residential uses that are purely residential would be on the east side. And then there would be interconnections, again, a shared road that would be consistent with the street patterns that are in the village, with the lighting, with sidewalks. This is the kind of long-term vision, but it's mentioned specifically in the zoning. So the uses that are spelled out in this draft, again, they borrow from other zones and include a few uses that are already there. So they include anything from restaurants to a brewery, personal services like a nail salon, retail, health and fitness, music and dance studios, daycare, bakery, offices. It's really a full complement of commercial and non-residential uses. There are design standards that would be applied to this area, again, to create this traditional neighborhood pattern. And any new development would require architectural review by the planning board. So that's an element of all of this.
Bonnie, may I ask for the permitted uses you just described, are those some of the things that are copied over from other use districts or like the other zoning? I guess my question is, because I see you have them enumerated here and they're 22 or 22 and a bit. I'm just kind of wondering why so prescriptive? Like, why are these kinds of businesses as opposed to others? And so that's...
So again, it's the combination of what's there. So for instance, we talk about auctioneer. We add that as a use. But it's also what is intended. So restaurants, breweries, some zoning for other communities is written very broadly. So it'll just say, and we do say retail, but some will very broadly say all offices, retail, commercial, and doesn't differentiate very much. Your zone, we're trying to fit within your zoning that exists now, and the zoning for the village does get into the detail of what it intended in terms of really specific uses. It's just we're trying to follow the same format.
Okay.
You know, in the future, that could in theory be changed, but I think we're trying to, I like sometimes when it's laid out in this way because it tells someone specifically what you intended, the uses that you really want for this zone. And ultimately, you know, depending on your zoning, the person who reviews the code and determines whether use fits will often, if it doesn't fit exactly within these terms, will decide whether it's close enough to fit within one of those use categories. But that's something done by your, I don't know if it's your building inspector or code enforcement officer that typically makes that determination. But I think we just wanted a very long list of everything that had the potential to be there, drawing from what's allowed elsewhere in the village and what could be considered specific to this neighborhood, if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. I guess my question is just sort of that these are based on businesses that we have currently and other, you know, other districts perhaps, but it doesn't seem to me like this considers future businesses that we haven't even thought of as of right now, you know.
It could be expanded. I think, again, we're trying to also balance the intent to be, that there's intended to be residential uses. So we also want to make sure that whatever commercial happens there, between the commercial and the residential, they align or they're somewhat compatible, exactly. Could there be more uses? Yes, I think we're in the process where this is right now a draft, and if there's other uses that village board members or the public contemplate, the village board feels would be appropriate, those can be added as well.
Thank you.
So, although a minor point in the zoning law, we are adding a section on what we call recreation fee in lieu of land. In New York State, you're allowed to, within a residential subdivision, ask for recreational land, public recreational land. When it cannot be achieved within that particular development, you can ask for a fee in lieu of recreational land. So someone may be charged, you know, I've seen fees $1,000 per dwelling unit, up to, frankly, if you go into Westchester County, $10,000, you know, per dwelling
I
unit.
think the town is 8,000.
The town is 8, yeah.
I believe so.
So, you know, and it all depends on what your recreational needs are. But this gives you the formal regulations to be able to charge that fee, which is important if you're contemplating additional residential uses within the community. It just helps support your recreational base. So another aspect of this zoning is that we've created this land use called planned residential development. And the minimum size for this use, it's a special permit use, is 10 contiguous acres. And the intent is to allow something called a planned residential development, which can allow multiple types of housing in one development. It can also allow ancillary, or as part of it, some non-residential uses. It's very common, it's something that's set forth again in both town law and village law, but people sometimes know it as planned unit development. We're calling it planned residential development because the primary use anticipated within this neighborhood area would be primarily residential. So it would allow multifamily, townhouses, single family. It would establish that there's a minimum amount of open space area that has to be set aside. It would also allow some limited non-residential development for adaptive reuse. We know, again, in that area, when we think of the Cookingham property, there's some older agricultural barns there, and if they wanted to be reused, they could be reused for particular non-residential uses as part of the overall development. The intent is to, again, put in sidewalks, to have lighting, to connect that property to other areas of the village so that it's not its own, its own little separate neighborhood, but that it's integrated into the fabric of the village. And because of where it's located, if you look at the land use study, it's contemplated that somehow there would be some kind of vehicular linkage between Cookingham and the Ross property, which would eventually get down Cherry Street. So that's all spelled out in the study, and then it's also accounted for in the zoning. So that's one of the primary aspects of the local law. And then probably the biggest, kind of surprisingly, the biggest aspect of this law is the creation of a section on workforce housing. And it establishes a mechanism that whenever the village has an application that comes in that has 10 more dwelling units, that a certain percentage, 10% of those dwelling units, be set aside for workforce housing, which is defined in the law. The developer would also get a 10% density bonus to be able to do that. So if you have 30 lot development, 30 dwelling unit development, 3 of those units would have to be set aside for workforce housing, and there's a whole regulatory process for doing that. And the applicant would get 3 additional dwelling units because they're setting aside, essentially their profit, the cost, what they can market these workforce housing units at from a value perspective.
Unlike what you just said about there need to be open space and there's not space to do that, they can pay per unit for whatever is lost. Would this be a similar thing where we don't want to provide 3 units, so would there be a way for them to pay to not have it?
There is.
Okay.
There is. And that's pretty common in workforce housing provisions.
Yeah.
So that it can go into a dedicated housing trust fund.
Perfect.
And then you can apply it somewhere else where it might make sense.
Excellent.
For instance, it could be that that monies are used to reuse a single family, convert it into a 3-family. Who knows? But it creates that
Sure. Yeah.
that nice pool of money to be able to head in that
Great.
direction with that objective.
Great.
The workforce housing to purchase, people couldn't exceed, I believe, 100% of the adjusted median income value for Dutchess. And then to rent, households couldn't exceed 80% of the median adjusted income. And that value will change over time as, based on wherever we are with those numbers. HUD, Housing and Urban Development, has published them. Dutchess County has them, but you track that. To the extent allowed by law, there's also a preferred eligibility process where you would give priority to, for instance, emergency service providers. So if they're ambulance volunteers, fire district volunteers, when this workforce housing becomes available, they would get first preference. Again, we just say within the law because we have to make sure that we're not in any way affecting fair housing, laws, et cetera. And then there's a whole step of various groups in order of priority who you would try and market these to and find out if they have a need. So that's in a nutshell the zoning. In terms of a timeline, once the village board is comfortable with the draft of the law, they would create a formal introductory law, and the village would do the environmental review process, seeker, which is required, on both the law and the study. Because the intent, again, is to adopt the study as an addendum to the comp plan, and then the local law would be adopted as law. So that process, again, it depends on when the village board is ready to take it up. As part of that process, there are required public hearings, and you also send it up to Dutchess County Planning for review as well. So that will be a process, and again, this is just first introducing the law to get some feedback and some sense of, reaction to the proposal. So thank you.
Thank you. Why don't we start with, if either of you have any specific questions in addition to what you've already asked? Okay. Does anybody else have questions, thoughts, comments?
Based on the proposal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So where it specifically speaks to RUPCO,
Mhm.
there is, the current zoning says that any development, I believe it's multi-use, multi-family units, has to be 150 feet from the blacktop. Is that correct?
That's, we've adjusted that, I thought we'd adjusted that from the road.
From the road.
Yeah, no, that's been adjusted to 50 feet.
Yes.
Because if
Definitely
you
it's
look
50.
at that parcel, 150 feet is practically in the woods. So it's,
So that would mean that property would be ineligible for that type of a project?
that's one of the adjustments that we've agreed to make. And so that didn't get into this, so that you can mark 50 instead of 150 on that.
Okay, well, that's a concern, considering that there is, you're going to have, 20 units of multifamily as well as 20 single-family homes and a mixed-use building that will create traffic. Are we going to have appropriate space for a turn lane if the road needs to expand, and sidewalk, and green space, and the building, and the parking behind it? The parking alone is 60 feet, or 65 feet for 22-inch parking space, and the 20 feet or so for 2 lanes. And then you have a building that's 45 or 50 feet deep. And then you have, the 81 feet from their drawing, original proposal, on the front of the building. So are we thinking all the way through about what might be required down the road, as opposed to building too close to the road and not being able to adjust it at a later time?
So there are actually 2 standards of setbacks. One is a 150-foot setback for most of those smaller
Oh, that's
lots,
right.
so that they'll be behind. But for the RUPCO property, the planned residential development use under which they would fall, that says all principal residential dwelling buildings shall be set back no less than 50 feet. So it's not a 50 feet, it's no less than. And the things that the planning board will have to take into consideration as they review the project will be things like, will DOT require turning lanes? Do they have the ability to provide that within the right-of-way that already exists? It does also talk about, but still having a sidewalk, having the frontage design reviewed, providing landscaping, providing those amenities to, again, connect it still with the rest of the village and the properties farther south. But again, it's a minimum, and all of this gets worked out through the site plan review process.
My other concern for that particular property is that what they've proposed in the initial drawings that we got is a building for the 20 units of apartments at approximately 171 feet long and 45 to 50 feet deep. So we're talking about a barn that takes up, it's about a third of that space, not quite a third of that space. And then you're going to put something that's 3 times the scale of the barn right there as you come into the village. And the way the road goes, as you're coming south, it slightly goes to the left, to the right, excuse me. So you're not only driving into town and seeing it, but it's actually what you're going to see when you come into town.
Mhm.
So the scale of it, to me too, could be a concern,
Right.
as we're trying to keep the idea of our village and keep to the plan of,
The scale of buildings and, yeah.
yeah.
So, in the draft zoning right now, we say that a building, dwelling unit structure, shall not be constructed to a length in excess of 120 feet. And ultimately, and it says unless approved by the planning board, but again, the planning board being the architectural review entity for the project, they have to decide whether that scale, that length, the design is appropriate
Great,
to your point
great.
and concerns. Yeah.
Because the height, I know we have a height restriction, I think it's 33 feet, but that whole property sits below, the grade of the road, so that's not so much, the height isn't so much an issue as the scale
It's
of
the scale of it,
Building.
right.
You also have the barn, which is sort of up, which is,
Yes.
as you're coming in, you'll see there's some farm housing first and then the barn.
We live across, I mean,
I know, you
obviously,
know it well, yes.
to everyone that we
Yeah.
live
Really.
across. But this is scale drawing of our house, the scale, the blue, and that's 171 feet of an apartment building.
Yeah.
So it really diminishes us and kind of a way that feels, we're glad to have the additional housing. We just don't want it to feel like it's swallowing or diminishing our
Your
existing-
house has been part of the discussion, because it is part of the important scale that
Yeah.
we're considering. And one of the reasons why we reduce the setback is because it's important that if they do build it, that they have the parking behind. Because we
Yeah,
wouldn't want to have
sure.
the parking.
Of course,
nobody's
yeah.
there. And there's that ridge right behind it.
Oh, yeah,
Sometimes-
it's, I mean, we measured it starting at the closest part,
Yeah.
the north end of that lot.
Mhm.
It's only about 175 feet back, which is tight, and then it's
Yeah.
all stone. I mean, you're going into
Right.
bedrock, and so that
Bedrock.
becomes, limits what you can
One of the
use.
things that we talked about, and I don't know if it's in this draft, was that we want to include street trees as,
Sure,
mandatory, so that they
Yeah.
really break up that sense of,
And I had
Yeah,
said to
that's
Karen, we have
reasonable.
property to the south of on our lot that would this work out, would allow the town to have access from Albany, or Old Post Road, all the way to Abrams Park in, a trade for something else that would be to the north of our lot, but the
Yeah.
point being that you would be able to have not only the park access, but if there were people that wanted to use the park,
yeah.
they would be able to park at where the apartments are too, and that
Yeah.
would alleviate some of our parking issue as far as accessing the walking trails.
May I take a moment? Is it,
Of course.
Okay, I mean, if everyone's okay with that. So, I think that I don't want to speak on everyone's behalf, but it seems like there had been some kind of shared vision, just very informally, that there's that what would happen on South Broadway if we just had talked about traditional neighborhood development on South Broadway. I think that there was a bit of an informal consensus developing that South Broadway would represent what is known as a reverse transect. So that
What is that?
a reverse, so it's kind of like fading in and fading out. It's kind of how Bonnie kind of sort of started the conversation. In a traditional pattern, you have a dense downtown core, and then it kind of fades out into the rural, into the countryside. And that's known as a transect, the fading out. And a reverse transect concept is the opposite. You densify at the edge of your general business district, to say, and it creates a very legible threshold. It's like a welcome to the town. So I think that there has been this, at least informally, an idea that we have a reverse transect at tradition, that somehow in time, between tradition and the movie theater and Holy Cow, there would almost either be this densification right there, or the new dental office potentially. There would be densification, on South Broadway, where you'd have almost a literal threshold that welcomes people into Red Hook. And I think, and at least the last time we gathered to discuss this language, the thought for the Gateway North was a transect rather than a reverse transect. So we had a 150-foot setback, and so that people would, so that as you were, let's say you were leaving Red Hook as you're northbound, you know, that fade out concept would still feel palpable. And, you know, I think, you know, there's a feeling that, you know, we can concentrate development energy south of Broadway, and we can celebrate the existing rural character, you know, in Gateway North. But it seems like, you know, this latest version of the language kind of takes a few steps back from that. And, you know, potentially, you know, unless we have, you know, a very astute zoning meeting and a very astute architectural review, you know, takes great care, you know, with building mass and building articulation, we could wind up with the problem, you know, of Gateway North being neither a transect nor a reverse transect. It would be, you'd have a wall of density on one side and countryside on the other. So, you know, so you'd be, let's say you're coming southbound into Red Hook, you're greeted by half of a canyon. And it's not really legible, you know, where the village starts or ends. And it's certainly not keeping with either historical character, you know, or it doesn't necessarily make a statement about where we go into the future either. So, you know, I'm, you know, for the little that I've, you know, familiarized myself with this new language today, I have a little bit of concern. And yet I also don't want to sound like, you know, a NIMBYist who doesn't want to make RUPCO's well-intentioned workforce housing possible. I just don't know how, I'm not exactly sure how we thread that needle.
I mean, that's the reason why we're having the conversation, is because we want the input, you know, and I think that's.
And ultimately, it's uncomfortable, but I think ultimately just good faith on the part of everyone is what we can, that's basically, it's nervous-making for all of us, I think, both as constituents, as lawmakers, as developers, everyone kind of has to.
When you look at that property where they are proposing this multi-family unit, is it 3 acres, 2 acres? I don't know. It's not very much property, where the
The whole
apartment
parcel
building.
is 12.
No, not where the houses
flat
are.
area
The
in front
flat
of it,
area
yeah.
that's
The flat
directly
area?
there on North Broadway, south of the barn. It's a small amount of property. So you're talking about taking the most dense portion of this community that they're going to create, putting it on the smallest part of the property. I realize they can make a lot of money by selling the lots where the 12 homes are. It is 12? No, 20 homes will go. That obviously, you know, when you give someone a half an acre, you're going to be able to get more money for the property you're selling. But it doesn't, or does it serve us in the village to have the most amount on the least amount of property where, you know, again, they're going to generate more income because they've used less of their property. It just seems that such a small amount of lot, that wouldn't it be better used as a part of our community as a small park and parking? The parking could be used for the mixed use of the barn. The parking could be used for people accessing the walking trails. And then a pocket park for the people that are going to live there seems ideal because it gives them a place to go when they're not in their apartment or their home.
It's interesting, as we were leaving the last workshop, Beth, okay, think of her last name right now.
Pagano.
Yeah.
Thank you. She kind of said, well, why don't you just put single-family houses or buildings that look like single-family houses along 9, because isn't that how 9 fades out already? You know, fades out into the countryside already. And it was an interesting comment, and I wish she hadn't reserved it for after the meeting. I wish it had been part of the record. But it was, you know, it was an astute, you know, and really accessible way of saying that's a lot of density, you know, on one side of the road.
You could, you know, I mean, obviously this is for RUPCO to decide, but if there were 3 units that looked like homes, and each of those 3 had 2 apartments in it, or 3 apartments, however they could accommodate, and it felt like more in keeping with the village, wouldn't that be more palatable than having the largest amount of density on the road?
A lot of this comes down to design, architectural
Sure.
design.
Yeah.
But yes, smaller more, from an aesthetic perspective, might fit more. Then we have to consider what can be accomplished in the range of if this is to be affordable.
Mhm.
So there's always a trade-off there. And I think somewhere in the middle, we need to get to a design, for sure.
We hired someone,
Okay.
just personally, to
Mhm.
come up with 5 different iterations of that property.
Okay.
Just say, like, could the apartments sit behind the barn? Could
Mhm.
they sit on the ridge? And would there still be enough property for people to have 20 units of property? We shared it with Karen, we shared it with Robert.
Mhm.
And just that there are other options besides on the road. And that's our concern. And, to reiterate David's point, this isn't about not in our backyard. I mean, our property's big enough. If we felt it was terrible, we would just plant trees or, it's not that. It's just that for the village, is it the right thing to have that much density on one side of the road?
And I will add too that I've recently been named the chair of the housing committee for the town. God bless us all. But one of the things one of my agenda items is to add new language or propose revised language for the new comp plan that says that when we talk about the existing, preserving the character of this community, it is that to date, character has been defined as existing visual and ecological character, and what we need to expand character to include the diversity of people who have historically lived here too. It's not just the historical visual landscape, but the people who make it possible. And I'm hoping that that language subtly acknowledges that that we love the diversity of incomes and and professions and and origin stories who live here. We don't want them. Again, this is just my way of saying we're not being NIMBYistic about this. To the point that I want to change the comp plan language to acknowledge.
And
that.
just be clear, the comp plan that's being worked on is the town comp plan?
Yes.
Which does not affect the village.
Of course.
And the TND district that you're talking about is in the town.
Yes.
So we have no jurisdiction over that.
Yes, asterisks on all of this.
Yes.
Yeah, but I just wanted to say that in terms of the spirit of it.
Mhm.
So can I ask a question? You said you did 5 options.
Mhm.
Did you have citing of that many units where it was able to be accommodated with a 150 setback?
Well, 150 is too far. It
Well, I
doesn't
mean, whatever,
work.
yeah, whatever we had before, was it
I don't
100
have it
before?
in front of me.
Might have been 75. Actually, I'd forgotten that the 150 is for farther south, so that the
Yeah.
businesses
But
don't turn into residentials.
But they they drew was a different way of showing the lots where the 20 homes were. I think
Okay,
right
so
now,
it's
they're on
reconfiguring that.
traditional cul-de-sacs and they're, pretty standard, and this allowed them to be splayed out in different ways that gave
So it's moving the apartment building from that site to like in the back?
behind the barn was one of them, and then further up on the ridge was one of them.
I'm wondering, because this really is a design question,
Mhm.
and it's a question of scale.
Mhm.
And so the scale is already, you had measured it 150, 170 feet long. And in the zoning, it says the maximum is 120. So we've already sort of addressed it can't just be one big block.
Right.
It could be 2 that aren't necessarily
Correct.
frontage on, sort of straight on.
Correct.
There are ways to
Absolutely. How they're
orient some
canted or-
buildings and having,
absolutely,
instead of
would
having
make a
one big, you
difference.
have,
Sure.
2 or 3.
Absolutely.
And that, I think that so long as we have, and I do think, as you're coming in from either direction, if we have a sidewalk and street
Sure,
trees,
sure.
that'll change the dynamic that's there significantly. And if the barn becomes an active
Sure.
business of some kind, that sort of also changes the dynamic because you go from there to the
Sure.
farm, which
Sure.
is now permanently protected. So,
Yeah.
So the first building that you would visually see as you're coming from the north is the barn building. And then the multifamily,
Well,
just in the concept that.
Sure,
that
sure,
was
sure,
done.
yes, yes, yes.
I'm just talking about the concept.
No, sure, sure.
That one has the multifamily below it. But, you know, I also see, for instance, the barn's parking sits behind the barn. You know, could the parking there instead go in the front and then the multifamily go where the parking is? I mean, but then you have to figure out places to put the multifamily parking. But, you know,
Yeah,
I
but
guess
each
from
one of
my
them
perspective, this is all.
accommodated the same amount
Yeah,
of units and the
conceptual.
same amount of parking
Yeah.
that was required.
Yeah,
There may have been smaller multifamily units along the road, I forget, one of them had,
I'm so sorry. I'm-
yeah, no, I didn't bring it, I didn't realize we would
the
go this far,
alternatives.
go this far into
Yeah.
depth about this. I'm just, I guess what I'm reading in the draft, it said, since they can't achieve the density, that there may be, perhaps it would be consideration of rezoning the Rupco property alone. Well, if we have already a zoning that says 150 feet, but now you said if you've changed that to 50 feet.
That's what they're
it's the planned residential district.
Okay,
They fall under that.
okay,
And so that supersedes what's in the other.
okay.
So to look at what the zoning, the proposed zoning for that parcel is going to be under the planned residential district. So
Yeah,
that's the
when
place
we
to
walked out of the last meeting and the 150 feet had been said out loud, and I was like, oh, good, we don't have to worry about this because that precludes them from being there. So losing 100 feet in that,
Yeah.
is a.
And I guess
It's all good, I mean. we're
but this
grown-ups.
is why we're having this meeting,
Sure.
this is why we've had meetings in between, is
Sure.
to say, what does this mean, what does it look like?
Absolutely.
Because I do think, you know, it is lower down, what does the mass of the building look like? It really won't be the first thing you see, but
We
you know,
talked
what are you
about,
saying
I
as you
mean,
look across?
David does this as part of his work. Sometimes until you see someone give you a visual of it, or until they make a model of it, you can't conceive always how it's going
hard
to
to
be when you
visualize,
see it. Yeah, so it's hard sometimes to visualize.
The other
Anyway,
thing is
go
that
ahead.
I know that the village is committed to, with this project, having a planner at those meetings that they go to the planning board,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
There will be a planner,
Yeah,
because it's such an
Fantastic.
important,
Yeah.
so like whatever architectural review process it goes through, there's gonna be like a lot of support there
Sure.
to make sure that it goes.
That it's following the zoning that we ultimately pass.
Yeah.
We were all on the same side. I mean, we came here on purpose. We
Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm
didn't
thrilled you're here.
add 6, rooms to our house or anything for that very reason,
Oh, right.
because we really appreciate,
Yes.
Yeah.
where we are and where we live, so.
Yeah, so I guess to summarize, your major concern is
The scale.
the scale and the bulk of the
Mhm.
building that might
And
be
just that
across.
you're, like you said, you're putting so many, it's very easy to say, oh, 20 apartments. When you think of that, 20 apartments could be 65 or 70 people living there, and 2 cars per person, per home, and, that's just, the scale of that alone is large. This is not just looking at the building, but it's everyone and all the activity that's going on. And so is this smaller lot enough to allow a comfortable existence for all of those people and getting along and having green space and, being able to,
And when you say smaller lot specifically, you're talking about that area that's at the base of,
correct,
The-
south of the barn
Right.
and that runs up against the ridge.
Right.
Like I said,
it's that space there, what fits
Mhm.
there.
I
Or should
mentioned it
something-
on the
Yeah.
parcel access map, and it's
Yes.
2.25 acre.
Yeah.
It's really a small, based on 12 acres, it's really a small portion of the larger.
Just to,
Yeah, no,
Sorry,
may,
sorry.
may I introduce myself?
Please.
I'm Frances Spark, and my partner Michelle Goldberg. We're the owners of 7621 North Broadway to the north. And firstly, we feel immensely privileged to have found this property. It's the most stunning place, it's a lovely village, and so I'm not at all as familiar as David is with regard to the zoning, but so I appreciate just more really what I want to say is appreciate being here today to listen to all these thoughts and helpful opinions. But the thing that I find is that access to Route 9 is quite dangerous. If you're coming, either you're coming up Post Road and you're cutting across to go north, or you're maybe coming out of your property or ours. And so particularly if you're crossing the road to go in the opposite direction. So I was wondering how that is all being taken into consideration, because there's a lot of traffic on 9, particularly at certain times of the day, and with all the new residences and businesses, how is that being considered?
So at this point in time, this anticipates changes, but when we actually get to site-specific development applications, all of them are required to be reviewed by the New York State Department of Transportation, because ultimately that is their jurisdiction, the road. But certainly when you have a development application, it gives you the opportunity to bring up with the DOT, we need to accommodate safe access for this new project, and what else can we do? You almost have, you have their attention at that point to be able to ask for crosswalks or whatever it is that may create this friction where people would slow down. So, that's what I would anticipate. That's the normal process.
So there are two jurisdictions then, is what you're saying, but
Well,
they juxtapose, but
Route 9 is a state road, so it is under the jurisdiction for the road is the New York State Department of Transportation. We as a village cannot say, you have to do this, you have to do that. That is up to, we can say to the DOT, we'd like to do this,
Okay.
but it is truly up to the DOT. But it's also why, for this development, we're looking at having
behind.
a road that goes around with other access.
Right.
So it's not both going out and around and out Cherry Street, and also behind CVS along that way, so that it's not all of those new residents wouldn't always be going out Route
Not
9.
onto 9. Okay.
Yeah.
They have
that
the idea is to have alternatives to just being forced onto Route 9.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that, right now in the middle, or where our property starts at the north is at the 30-mile-an-hour marker. And there's been talk, I think, at moving the 30-mile-an-hour marker further north so that it allows for people to slow down more as they're coming into that.
But
Right.
by law, the 30 miles an hour starts farther out. So I would recommend putting another marker, not moving the one that's there.
Oh, no, I don't see moving it. I'm just saying like the zone could start at Willowbrook Road or somewhere where you're coming in, so that by the time we would have an easier way to get out of our driveways.
I will say that is a perennial problem everywhere.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure.
And it is, and not just in our village and not just in Dutchess County, but because I'm on the Dutchess County Transportation Council, and they are connected with other counties
Sure.
around. Drivers are speeding more, they're ignoring traffic laws on a more, in a worse way than they have in the past, which is frustrating.
Yeah.
But, and so potentially, because you're on the west side, if DOT sort of looks at it more carefully, there could be some additional items that they would do on Route 9 at that point, which would benefit you.
Sure. And you and I talked the other day about, I had said, oh, wouldn't it be nice if there was sidewalk that ran from in front of our house all the way up to Willowbrook in case people were using the walking trails, that they had a safe way to get to Willowbrook. And that would also give, a conversation with DOT that would allow, like, oh, we have people on the sidewalk now, so we need this to extend north so that we're safe.
DOT's intent is always to move people through their roads. And so they in general don't want to slow, they want them to go through.
Sure.
But because you're entering the village actually farther north, of, when we talk about the Cookingham property, who knows, maybe there's an opportunity to actually, if this does become more densified, to put a stop, as soon as you hit the village.
Yeah.
And then have a crosswalk.
Ideally.
No, I get it.
Yeah.
So have
Yeah.
realities.
Because we
I'm
hope
thinking-
that if the barn takes off into
Sure.
something, that would be a place where
Yeah.
there would be a logical place for a stoplight.
Yeah.
And
So it would be
in
as well.
in addition, we've also talked about doing nicer, and Mount Cork and I've talked about this a lot, a much nicer visual of welcome to the village.
Sure,
Trying to
sure,
figure
sure.
out sort of where you put that.
Yeah.
And if you put that sort of roughly at Willowbrook, it's
Mhm.
another visual
Mhm.
to say, oh, I'm in a
By the
new
way, slow
spot.
down. Mhm.
Yeah, you know, with a 30 mile an hour, with maybe
Yeah.
a light, with a sign, with, you know,
For the thing
all
that
of
says
those
this is how fast
things.
you're going, can you please
Yeah.
slow down? Typically, I'm always
We're
like,
working
oh
on
my
that.
God, how is this so slow? But then you realize, because it's so dense and all of the
Yeah.
students that are there.
So,
you have
yeah,
to
so
really pay
all
attention.
of, yeah, so all of those things, and that's not necessarily specific to the zoning. Again,
Sure,
it's, you
sure.
know, it's working with
Yeah.
DOT, and if housing is added, you know, as housing is added, what does that look like?
Absolutely, sure.
I will say that it is not the state who will pay for those sidewalks,
Mm.
but,
Well, we figured it probably would be us anyway, so.
well, hopefully, well,
Hopefully so,
well,
you mean the-
or, I mean, there are grant opportunities,
Yeah,
and so
sure,
we're
sure.
certainly looking for those, but,
Right.
we have several opportunities for
Yeah.
sidewalks.
So in terms of the sidewalk that's envisaged, there'll be one on the east side connecting the new development into the village. And I think to your point, I mean, you know, we aren't moved in, so, but I'm very conscious that, you know, we have a lot of land abutting the road, and be perfectly happy for there to be a sidewalk along there, because I've seen people, you know, walking, and it looks quite dangerous, frankly.
Being one of those, it
Yeah.
is an adventure to walk
Yeah.
along.
Yeah, so it
Thank
seems
you.
to me
Well,
that
no,
would,
that's,
that
I
would
mean,
be
it's
very
wonderful to hear
appropriate.
you say that, and I think, you know, that's part of it, is where's it gonna go, and how does it work? And that's pretty flat over there, so,
You know, there was a driveway there at one point, you know, but one side of the trees, but,
Yeah.
but the side towards the road is very flat, and,
Sure.
Yeah.
and you know, it's not to be used for anything else, frankly. So,
right.
you know, be very comfortable if that was used for public access.
One of the lovely quirks of this village is the way that sidewalks leapfrog across the street. And are connected by crosswalks.
You have to walk like this.
Yeah, and I'm sure that some people think it's merely inconvenient, but I actually think it's one of the things that adds to the character of this place. And I'm just really glad that this conversation has taken this direction, because that we're not simply talking about matters of aesthetics. That we are talking about the movement of people and vehicles and the safety of all involved. I think it just I'm just for whatever it's worth, it's nice that that we're speaking about this in such a multidimensional way.
Well, and I think to the extent this isn't addressed already in the land use study, it's something that can be added even more pointedly, because your regulations can only say so much. It's zoning, it's just regulatory. That's why you have a study to be able to explain, okay, this is what we really want. This is what our intent is. This is what we envision. You're able to put that all in the study, and it becomes very important that the two be used hand in hand.
Sure. I didn't realize that the study would be an addendum, and I think that's brilliant, because it does say this is what we looked at, this is why we got to this,
That needs to be considered at the same
absolutely,
time.
sure.
Yeah, in theory, the study comes first, and then the zoning comes out of
Yeah.
that.
Mhm.
It also, we obviously, as a village, need to do a comprehensive plan.
Sure.
And rather than do a comprehensive plan and then work on the zoning, this was a way to, and also when we first met with Bonnie, it was, this should be done with an eye to the whole village.
Sure.
So it's not something that is sort of separate and weird on its own. It's something that is logical for the whole village when we get to the next step, which is sort of a more full
Sure.
comprehensive plan.
Yeah.
But we need to do.
The tricky thing about this property, which I think is so important, is the elevations on it, it's like it's such a, like I always say that the most walkable area is, I always call it the garden grid, because it's all those great cross sections. And this, I would love to be able to just say, let's put a grid right on it, and then you can't, because it's,
You have that big hill in the middle.
Yeah.
I don't
It's
know if you've
different
done this, and I would
topographically,
encourage
it's
all of
different
you
than the
to
rest of
drive
the
up to the top of that property.
I
It
walked
is,
up there.
first of all, it's amazing, the views are amazing, but there's this whole area, it's like a meadow, you don't even know that it's there, and I think, all of this is going to be so, it's great that it's going to be used, but there's a lot more property there than people realize, and that you're seeing. There is topography, but it's not, all of it is not as complicated as that one ridge of stone, so. And I think the Ross, that they're doing something there too is really great, because here doubling this thing that we're trying to accomplish, which is more housing. That's kind of great.
We do acknowledge that that property is on this hill. And so the zoning does talk about preserving vegetation
Sure.
so that it doesn't look like, you know,
Right.
suddenly, yeah, it's stripped or, you know, everybody's surprised because you don't necessarily think about it,
But
but it-
erosion could be a
Yeah.
nightmare for,
Yes.
at the bottom of that.
Right.
If you clear cut that, and then there's nothing keeping the water from, I mean, obviously you put
And
in
that's,
drains
and
and all
that's
that,
certainly
but
not,
that's
the
a
yeah,
whole.
and that's not the intent.
Sure,
Yeah.
no, of course, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that is such a, you know, it's really going to be, I can't imagine anything than a street going north-south on the
Mhm.
property, just the way that it's built, just the way that it's
Mhm.
set up, the topography. And so the desire is within that pattern to get the connection,
Sure,
you know, down into the Rocco site,
yeah. It's great.
but sort of on
I
the
think of it
backside.
up into rather than down into, but.
Yeah.
Well, she's coming from behind. You're coming from off
Well,
of
yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
I'm coming from Cherry.
church, yeah.
There you go.
Or not church, but church.
Sure.
Yeah, and, you know, and the whole idea around how do we create a sense of place, you know, what, because most people don't distinguish between the village and the town.
Mhm.
Though I've started talking about the village, and I say this to the town supervisor frequently, the village is the heart of the town.
Mhm.
And so, trying to figure out how to visualize that. But then to create that sense of place, like you're coming into something.
Mhm.
And also to do, we've also been learning quite a bit around, you know, it'd be one thing to get our speed limit down to 25, but putting up a new sign by itself isn't going to do the
No.
trick.
And it's.
So with street trees, with narrowing the visual, even though the travel lane remains the
Mhm.
same, if it looks narrower, you will slow down
Mhm.
by, you know, but if it's sort of wide open and flat and you can see, you know,
The straight,
Yeah.
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 I've
And
done
if
the
you're,
same.
if you're thinking that the parking spots are driving lanes, which is, it's easy to think, but
And that's one of the things we're talking about is possibly
in the.
marking out on the road where the parking is, so that'll visually make it look smaller,
Sure.
which it does when there are cars parked there.
Sure.
And we're also looking to apply for a grant to look primarily at the center of the village, to do things to improve the walkability and the pedestrian experience and the like. And so we're really hoping to take that and get that grant, do some planning, put some things in, and then just sort of expand that out.
That's great. I
lot
came out
to
of my
do.
driveway the other morning and someone, I didn't really see them and as I was going south, and it's 30 miles an hour at my property.
Yeah.
And they come right up on me, flashing their lights and blowing the horn. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my God. These people are walking here, kids are here. This is so crazy.
No, essentially, you know, there will be many more kids, you know, across the street.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe in a multifamily building for whom, you know, 9 is practically their backyard.
Yeah.
Well,
Having
there
this
are
extra
those
road too.
families right there behind.
There are-
the
there are,
nursing
yeah,
home. Yeah, you
apartments
see those
behind.
families walking all the time, I
Yeah.
get so worried for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's definitely sort of the broader vision of trying to create, and the happy news is there's much more of an awareness that the drivability is not the only important thing.
Sure.
It certainly used to be that, you know, how fast can you get people through?
Mhm.
Whereas now it's like, well, wait a minute, we need to also remember that there are other people using the road and the extended road. We don't have wide enough roads for a true bike path, for example. It's interesting, we had sidewalks over here on Fraley and Garden, and rather than fix them, they got taken up, which is really too bad.
Some of them still, there's still some of them, you know, the last Brent.
I think
Rest
the last
is
one, I
gone.
think they're gone.
Yeah, so I think.
But one of,
I'll be gone.
oh, sorry, one of the things that's interesting about North Broadway is that there used to be a lot of really old houses, and then when the Taconic ended here, they just cut them down because everyone, you know, so it's like, we really,
Mm.
yeah, so I mean, like CVS, there used to be a really nice house there, you can see old postcards of just these like picket fences, and, you know, you,
Really
if you were
gorgeous
driving
front.
through that now, you'd slow down. But
Mhm.
because we put the parking in front, there's like a visual language that people still speed through.
Mhm.
So the hope is that with these changes, we can encourage bringing that back,
Sure.
you know,
Yeah.
with the concerns that, you know.
North Broadway looks a lot like Stockbridge does today,
Yeah.
once
Yeah.
upon a time.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Great. Any other comments or questions? My goal is, I mean, the whole idea about this was to have this conversation. Very grateful for you all for being here. And then we will regroup and look, and I believe at our next meeting, probably our workshop, which is in 2 weeks, we'll probably have a discussion. Are we ready to proceed? Do we have all the amendments that we want? And then the follow-up is a public hearing, the environmental review. Dutchess County needs to review it, and they take a month. And so the idea is at this point, we've taken a while to get here in an attempt to be thoughtful and mindful. It's a lot, and it's a lot to sort of take in and understand all the different pieces of the puzzle. But I think we're now at a point where, we need to keep pressing forward.
Sure.
So,
Thank you for hearing us.
Karen, could I,
That was a lot.
may I, do I understand that Rutco has already bought the 12 acres, or is that still in discussion?
my understanding is that the town and Rubco have an agreement, but they have not closed on the sale.
Right. And so are they waiting on the outcome of this
No, I don't think so.
in terms of sort of determining what they will or not, will
It's-
not
I mean, as you-
commit to?
Well, as you might imagine, I mean, Rubco has a lot of projects.
Yeah.
And I believe that there may be a grant associated with enabling them to purchase the property. And there's always the possibility that it won't work. And so, sort of making sure that all the i's are dotted and all the different considerations are made. And part of it is also related to sewer system.
Right.
You need to have a sewer system. And the village is working towards expanding our sewer system. It's one of those
Quite
things
a long
that
time frame, really, from,
timeframe is part of the process.
okay.
So all of that is in the mix in terms of timing. I would assume that it's going to happen soon, that the final closing will happen, but I haven't heard of a date.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Sure.
And we're very lucky that this kind of project will happen in the village.
I think with all the considerations and all of the
Yeah.
thoughtful conversation, et cetera, I think that I'm excited for what we can have. And, when prior planning work was done and early on prior to the sewer system that we have, the idea was to put the infrastructure in the village so that we could densify the village, so that we could continue to maintain the open space and protect the farms in the town. So the idea was not to sort of have developments everywhere, but to organize it in a way
Sure.
that sort of allows for, because making it walkable and having the sidewalks and doing all of that, if you concentrate it, it seems to me that it can be a little more successful, more efficient. And so with that in mind, and it's actually interesting when you look, even separate from the 12-acre parcel at the north, there's a fair amount of infill land opportunities. And so and we desperately need more housing. I mean, the housing stock we have, the prices have gone up. I mean, I've been here just over 10 years. The pricing is absolutely nuts. And so I've heard so many people say, my kids grew up here, but they can't stay because there aren't places for them to be. I've also heard older folks who say, I don't really want my big house, but I'd like to stay here, but there's nowhere for me to move to. And tradition really, some thought that was going to be an option, and it's an option, but it's not really an option. I mean, the pricing of that has gone up significantly as well. So, to give additional housing and different shapes and sizes enables for movement around
Sure.
that will hopefully keep a little of everything. It's lovely to have some, fully renovated houses that are going for a nice price. It's good for all of us, but it's also good to have a whole mix. And the school system is not at all busting at the seams. They could desperately use more kids.
Mhm.
Desperately is the wrong word. They could very much use more kids, And that would be a benefit to all of us and the school
So they get
districts.
less state funding when they have less children.
Sure.
So it becomes a taxpayer burden to pay for the infrastructure to run everything when there's not as many kids. So it would be a benefit to us to have more kids in the system.
Well said, thank you.
But, even putting those kids in the village, by densifying the village, I mean, that, you're concentrating resources, but that even prevents drop-off madness from getting worse, right? It's already pretty active, at 7:30 in the morning.
That's a
Yeah.
gracious way to say that.
Wouldn't it be nice to, if you added more kids to that scenario, they would be doing it on foot instead of, having to be driven from some far off
Yeah.
subdivision.
And that's again, the benefit of having the walkable paths,
Yeah. Since she's not here, I'll just speak on,
bicycle
for
paths.
Susan, again, can't remember Susan's last name. Susan who was,
Line?
pardon?
Susan Line?
Yes, and she would say, only Emmett had a place, could have walked to
Safe.
school.
Mhm.
This is before Emmett was, got his driver's license, but that was really important to her. And when I talk with my downstate friends who maybe will move here someday, like my best friend Lee, her first question was, well, how would Blue Bell get to school? So the
Yeah.
sidewalks are.
She'll walk 5 miles in bare feet through the
No.
snow. just like
Uphill.
the rest of us.
Both ways, right.
My daughter's gonna have to start
I'll go
walking
both
next
ways.
year, and she's gonna have to cross Route 9.
Yeah.
Never mind. The other thing, Planet Money did a thing where they did a little video reel on Instagram, and they were talking about how even luxury housing, then that becomes the next, in 30 years, that becomes the affordable housing. We have to keep building in order to
Mhm.
keep up with demand.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons why the sewer is it's such an opportunity point for the village, that we have that, because it allows for the kind of building that hasn't been able to be built here for decades. So hopefully,
Centuries.
hopefully, moving forward, we're gonna have that kind of feeling that Tivoli has, right? Where you can walk and you feel safe and there's that density.
Can you have the
because of the
scale
investment.
of that property where George Cole Auctions is? And that's all just low,
Yeah.
really
Untapped,
untapped,
yeah.
and that's enormous.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
a fantastic
Yeah.
opportunity for someone.
Absolutely.
So that's, knowing that you're set up success for that by expanding the
And there are,
sewer to the
you'll
water
know,
valley.
if you look at the map, this little funny spot here,
Mhm.
this is the diner,
Mm.
this is the Victorian.
Mm.
It goes deep.
Mhm.
They could put an
Sure.
apartment building back there.
Behind you, yeah.
And so that's why they're included in it, because it makes perfect sense.
Oh, sure.
It's, it's tucked back, and it's otherwise, I think right now it's a garage. So,
Yeah.
and there's enough land for and again, it has to go through the process, and they'll have to lay out their parking, but it's a perfect opportunity for some, village
Even where
housing.
Kyle is, that was another one of those things, I'm like, oh my God, I had no idea this went back as far as
Yeah.
it does. And
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
great,
the
these
best
are
part
great
about
opportunities. Yeah.
Looking
yeah.
at something from a bird's eye
Yeah,
view.
exactly.
Any other questions, comments?
I just wonder, it seems like Repco's been very distant from this conversation.
No.
No?
Mm-mm.
Oh, okay. And,
The idea, what I wanted to do was to do zoning the way we want to do zoning, with Rocco in mind. We want to create the space for this to work, for affordable housing.
Sure.
I think Rupco does incredibly important work, and so they've gotten drafts. We've met. We go through that process. We've gone through that process with them.
Great.
And so,
So-
and the move there is, you're not regulating this project out of existence, but.
Correct.
But
But we're also doing it in a
with
way.
guardrails?
Yeah, doing it with doing it with an eye to the
Or
village.
guidance, yeah.
Yeah,
Or if they did drop out and there's a different developer,
Right.
we want it to still be the vision
Right.
that the village wants.
If not them, then
Sure.
someone's
Sure.
going to use that parcel.
Yeah.
Yep, until we want to, and that's actually what led us to the workforce housing. Because we thought, well, if Repco doesn't do this project and a developer comes in, then we've lost our entire opportunity for workforce housing.
Yeah,
And
and
that would be a real shame.
we're not against Rupco by any means. We think what they're doing is great too. So this isn't, if we're saying like, oh, we would hope it could be like this, it's not because we don't. appreciate that.
I think that, I
Do
think
it,
that,
so.
I think the question and the understanding of the mass of the building, you know, it's a little, I will compare it to the sewer system when you think about, oh, there's this, you know, it's gonna be this much bigger and it's gonna be this huge wash of discharge. Well, no, actually, it's, you know, what
Yeah,
is it,
sure.
what is it for real?
Sure.
And what does it really look like?
Yeah.
And what are the possibilities and how can we make this work? So, so yeah, no, I think that's, but yes, no, we've included, and again, I wanted this to be a village process that was done with REPCO in mind.
Yeah. This, you know, when we say hired our own architect, I mean, that it sounds a little abrasive, but, you know, this process, the only conscionable thing to do is to look deeply into the REPCO portfolio. And it's impressive, you know, what they can do on, you know, with very few resources, and you know, just imagine all the administrative behind the scenes work to make that happen. But just speaking from the point, you know, just from the perspective of, you know, the way that they form buildings, you know, is sensitive to context. They excel at, you know, working within existing urban fabrics. You know, that the project in Kingston, you know, even inside the building, you know, the way that they've created, you know, shared bathrooms for those occupants. I mean, they are deliberate and innovative thinkers. So, you know, it's a privilege that they'll be working.
And
with,
respectful
you know.
of the people who are going to live there, which is what I love. Yeah.
So inside and out, I mean,
I mean, the Carney Group,
thoughtfulness is-
does similar.
Mhm.
They're the ones who actually built and run Red Hook Commons, the low-income senior housing that we have. We're lucky to have them, which is also why they're so busy.
Yeah.
Could use, if I had a new career ahead of me, that would be a fun thing to do. Okay, Bonnie, anything you'd like to?
No, I appreciate all the comments. You know, they're very, it just helps this be a better document. You know, consider them along with the village board and then see where the village board wants to go.
Great.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank
Sounds
you.
good.
Thank you very much.
All right, with that, I will take a motion to,
I had one note, and I could send it
Please.
separately, it was just that it's one map with the location of the village of Red Hook. It's illegible in black and white, 'cause
Okay.
it's not,
oh, right.
it's not
Because
Yeah.
we don't always print things out in color.
Color, okay.
just,
Maybe do a different base.
yeah, or even just write the village
Highlight it
of Red Hook or
differently.
hatch it, or whatever, however you wanna do it, it just, I'm
So that it works for copies, yeah.
Okay.
Because it's not actually written the village of Red Hook on it, it's highlighted, but you can't see that.
Okay.
But that's a very small.
Well,
Very practical, very practical. Yes, so with that, I will take a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Thank you, Fran. Second,
Second.
thank you, Milcorca. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned.